Now that we've learned something about the structure of debate, let's talk about how debaters take notes on their speeches, and how taking notes effectively and precisely can help debaters better organize their speeches. Policy debaters practice a special kind of note-taking called flowing. We use this term because policy debate note-taking is designed to represent not just single speeches, but the flow of a debate as it develops over the course of many speeches. Debate speeches follow a particular structure, which we call line by line. We'll talk about how exactly line by line works in a future video. For now, all you need to know is that each speech is supposed to respond to arguments made by previous speakers in the same order that they were made. Our goal when flowing is to represent line by line refutation as it's occurring, as well as to help debaters follow line by line order as they give speeches themselves. To do this, we change four main things compared to how you would take notes in a typical class. The first thing we change is that we flow on multiple sheets of paper. Since there are many argument themes in any given debate, we want to make sure we always know which position we're focusing on. For this reason, the debate about each position advanced by the AF or neg, whether an advantage, a disadvantage, a counterplan, gets recorded on its own sheet of paper. The second thing we change is that we flow in columns, instead of writing sentences down horizontally. Each speech should be represented by its own column, starting with the first speech on a position, the 1AC for the case, and the 1NC for the off case, and proceeding from there. We do this because of the third change we want to make from normal note-taking, which is that we want to align our notes so that the parts of speeches that respond to previous arguments are written down next to each other. This helps us do line by line because it clearly shows the order that arguments are made and which parts of a speech respond to which argument. The fourth thing we change is that we use shorthand. Each debater typically develops their own shorthand, but given how quickly debaters speak, it's impossible to keep sufficiently detailed notes without using shorthand. Examples of common shorthand include exclamation mark in a circle to represent an impact, L dash to represent link, UQ to represent uniqueness, I backslash to represent internal link, a not equal sign or a circle with an X through it to represent not or the opposite of. Some of this is kind of difficult to picture in the abstract, so let's demonstrate what we're talking about by showing an example of a flow. This is a blank sheet of flow paper. Since debaters flow in long columns, we like to use long sheets of legal paper to give more vertical room. As the first speaker introduces an argument, in this case the 1AC introducing an advantage, we write down the tag of each card they read. Notice the little line and X below each card. This is how some debaters indicate that a card was read to support an argument, rather than just an analytic. If you can, try to make a note of the author of each card as well, and when it was written, although that's less important than writing down the tag. Also notice that the entire tag is not being written down. The flow only retains the key information from a tag, so it's quicker to write down. Now the second speaker goes, in this case the 1C presenting its answers to the advantage. A couple things are important to note here. The first thing to note, which we will describe more when we talk about line by line, is that the second speech on each page sets the order of arguments. That means we don't need to line the 1NC arguments up with the 1AC arguments. We can just write them straight down. However, notice the numbers that we are writing down next to our 1NC arguments. Numbers create a convenient way for later speeches to refer back to arguments we made in the 1NC. For example, instead of restating the argument, we can just say extend 1NC number 1. Second, notice the gap between the first 1NC argument and the top of the page. We're leaving this gap because the 2AC might present an overview for their argument that we would need to write down at the top of the page. If we didn't leave enough space, the overview would start to overlap with the first 1NC argument, and we couldn't line up the 2AC with the 1NC. Third, notice the gaps that we're leaving between 1NC arguments. The 2AC will likely make multiple responses to each 1NC argument. We want to have enough room next to each 1NC argument to write down all of the 2AC responses. A good rule of thumb is the 3-finger rule. 3 fingers should be left between each 1NC argument. Finally, notice that we're writing down the neg speeches in a different color pen. You don't have to do this, but doing so will help you tell the speeches apart, letting you stay organized. Now that the 1NC has introduced its arguments, it's the 2AC's turn to respond. Sure enough, the 2AC presents an overview, so it's good that we left some room to write it down. Next, the 2AC responds to each 1NC argument in order. Notice that most of these arguments are analytical arguments, that is, arguments that aren't attached to a new piece of evidence. Using a line with an X to mark that a card has been read helps us distinguish those analytical arguments from arguments that use a card. Some of these 1NC arguments drew quite a bit of 2AC fire. Once again, it's good that the person flowing these speeches planned ahead by leaving enough room between 1NC arguments to write down all the responses, while keeping the arguments aligned with each other. One tactic that helps you stay organized is to start flowing the responses to each argument slightly above the argument made by the previous speech. This builds in some room in case the 2AC makes more arguments than we expect. We're not going to go through the whole rest of the debate, but the rest of the debate proceeds in a similar fashion. Arguments are written down in order, aligned with each other. Notice that some parts of the flow end in earlier speeches, while other parts go all the way. This is because the teams are making choices about which arguments to extend. A bonus of this approach is that when a team concedes an argument, it becomes very visually obvious that this has occurred, since there's an argument from an earlier speech with nothing written down next to it. Thanks for watching our video about flowing. Tune in next time to learn more about line by line and how to organize your speeches.